Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to AlphaBiolabs' latest webinar entitled DNA Demystified, the Role of Testing in Family Law. My name's Andrew Priestley, and I'm the Marketing Manager for the legal sector at AlphaBiolabs, and I'm delighted to be joined this morning by my colleague, Casey Randell. Casey is our Head of Genetics. In terms of the agenda, the webinar will last for between 35 to 40 minutes. I'm going to hand over to Casey in a moment, who will lead on the webinar. She'll talk to you about the range of DNA relationship tests that are available and indeed what we can offer at AlphaBiolabs. Casey will then talk about what's covered in our DNA reports, and then she'll finish with a couple of real-world case studies example which specifically relate to family law. She'll then pass across to myself, and I'm going to talk about the chain of custody requirements for court admissible results. And then, as ever, we'll finish with our usual Q&A session. We did receive a few questions from people when they were registering, so thank you to those of you that did that. We will answer those questions in the live webinar. If anybody else thinks of anything during the webinar, then please use the Q&A function or the chat function that is on the Zoom technology which you're watching this webinar on this morning. Please use that to ask any question that you have, and we will answer it at the end. If we do run out of time, then don't worry, ask as many questions as you want, because we will send emails to you with answers if we don't have time to actually answer it in the live webinar. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. Okay, so let's get started. With that, I'm going to hand over to Casey. Good morning, Casey.
Good morning, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. So today we are going to be talking... Apologies. So today we're going to be talking about our DNA testing. So I thought it would be a good idea to start with, what is DNA? So DNA is this helical compound that you can see on the screen in front of you. It's a complex molecule, and it essentially is your full complement of genetic information that your body needs to function, to grow, to survive, to reproduce. And essentially your DNA is stored as 23 pairs of chromosomes, and that includes 2 sex chromosomes. So females will have an XX chromosome pair and males will have XY. And so all of your chromosomes are stored within the nucleus. So the nucleus of each cell will contain a full copy of your DNA. And what's really interesting about DNA is that most of it is exactly the same. So if we looked at 2 different people, most of their DNA would be exactly the same, because it is just the building blocks of life. It is just telling your body exactly how to function. But there are small pockets of DNA that are in non-coding regions, and these have been found to be hypervariable between individuals. Your DNA, you get 50% from your mother and you inherit 50% from your father. A lot of people will say to us, I look a lot more like one parent than the other. I'm physically more like them. I have similar traits to them. And while that is true in a lot of cases, what we do find is that 50% genetically of your DNA will have come from each of your parents. And everybody has a unique DNA profile, apart from identical twins who share an identical DNA profile. So we can test a lot of different sample types, and typically we will use cheek swabs or buccal swab samples. And these are collected by rubbing a cotton pad on the inside of the cheek. These are really simple and easy to collect, and the DNA can be stored on the sample for up to 12 months following collection. So they're a perfect sample type to use for DNA testing. They're quick and painless. Like I say, we have the ability to collect them from the very young, from a newborn baby, all the way up through life. There are some occasions where we would request an alternate sample type. So, for example, in our prenatal DNA test, which I'm going to talk more about later on in the presentation, we would require a blood sample to be provided from the mother. We are able to also offer blood sample testing or other reasons if that is the only sample that is available for testing, or potentially if it had been stored by a pathologist, we would be able to test a blood sample. And then the other common sample that we get are nail clippings. So these are often from deceased individuals where it's not possible to obtain buccal swab samples or blood or histology samples. So we can clip nails and they contain DNA. The samples can come into the lab and we are able to test them for a range of different tests. So I'm now going to discuss some of the different tests that we offer. And our most popular test by far is the parentage test. Usually we are doing paternity tests to determine whether a man is the true biological father of a child in question, but we are increasingly being asked to carry out maternity tests as well. These tests are often used for immigration purposes. We've also seen a rise in people carrying out tests following IVF treatment just to determine that they are the true biological parents of the children. And parentage tests are the best tests, in my opinion, that we can offer. They will give you the best peace of mind. They will give you conclusive results almost every time. They're a really strong and powerful test to use. We also offer sibling tests. So this is usually used in circumstances where the parents are not available for testing. So we get a lot of cases where the alleged father is unavailable. He might be out of the country or deceased and we have no access to him. So instead we would carry out a sibling test. And this will allow us to establish whether people are likely to have two parents, one parent or no parents in common. So essentially working out whether people are full siblings or half siblings, or even unrelated. So these tests can occasionally come out as being inconclusive. And if the result is inconclusive, we would look to test more DNA markers, or we could look to include more sample donors to help us to get a conclusive result. We can also consider a Y chromosome test. So as I mentioned earlier, males will carry XY sex chromosomes. And whenever a man has a child, if that child is male, he will pass his Y chromosome onto that child directly. So fathers and sons will share an identical Y chromosome profile. Also, brothers that share the same father will have an identical Y chromosome profile, and so will any paternally related males in the family. So not only is the Y chromosome test good for siblings, but it's also better in some of the more distant relationships that we can test. For example, aunts, uncles, and grandparents. So these tests are really useful if the alleged parent of the child isn't available, there's potentially no siblings that are around to test. We can look to maybe do an aunt, uncle, or grandparent test. The donors do need to be full siblings of the alleged parent, and you can even include one or both alleged grandparents. So in all of the tests that we carry out, we would compare the relationships and carry out a statistical analysis looking at the DNA that is matched and shared between the individuals and how common or rare that DNA is within the relevant population. We carry out the statistical analysis to obtain a likelihood ratio, and that is converted into a probability of relatedness so that it's nice and easy for people to understand their test results. Another test we are able to offer is a cousin test. We would do this with 25 DNA markers as standard, and we would increase the chance of getting a conclusive result by asking for other family members to take part in the test. What we are able to do is we are able to include more family members so that we can build up a really comprehensive family tree. And this helps to ensure that our results are accurate and they're the best for the scenario, and they're taking into consideration the relationships that we know about, for example, a mother and her child, and then we're comparing that against the relationship we're not sure about. So that would be, the alleged father. We're trying to work out are these members of his family. I've also included here, we can consider the Y chromosome test for paternally related males. So how can a conclusive result be optimized? Now, conclusive results generally occur in all paternity and maternity cases, and there is no issue with those. It is just the more indirect tests, so the siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents that may have a inconclusive result. Now, inconclusive means that there is insufficient genetic evidence with which we are able to draw a conclusion from. And so what we would look to do is we would look to increase the number of tested DNA markers. So we use 25 DNA markers initially for all of our tests. That is more DNA markers than many other labs, and it is suitable for most DNA test types. So we would start off with a 25 marker test. If we need to increase the amount of genetic evidence that's available to us, we are able to increase that to 45 DNA markers. And often this will help us to get that conclusive result for your case. We are also able, if necessary, to go up to 153 DNA markers, and this is the most powerful test that we are able to offer. The other option to increase the amount of genetic evidence that's available is to add more people to the test. So including more family members will increase the amount of genetic evidence that's available. For example, if you instruct a sibling test, we are likely to ask you if the mother of the child, or if she's got one child, if she's got both children, the mother or mothers, to provide a sample, because having more people is more likely to get a conclusive result. I've included here an example of a full sibling test using 25 DNA markers versus 45 DNA markers. So on the top row, we have 74.1% chance of obtaining a conclusive result if we just have 2 siblings and we use 25 DNA markers. This increases to 86% chance of getting a result if we can increase that to 45 DNA markers. And then on the bottom row, if you include the mother of the test, that is even more powerful with 24 markers than doing a 45 marker test with just the 2 individuals. So our chance of getting a conclusive result increases to 93.5%. If we go to the mother and 45 markers, it's up at 98.1%. Now, all of these DNA cases are different. We do have a team of highly skilled, highly trained case managers who will be able to advise you on what is most appropriate for your scenario. And if you do obtain an inconclusive result for your test, we will discuss what options there are available to increase the chance of getting a conclusive result. It's really frustrating for us, so we do aim to provide conclusive results in all cases if possible, and we'll advise you on the best way to get that conclusive result if it doesn't happen with the first test that we perform. We'll just keep going until we get one. So that's all the standard tests that we can offer. Like I say, if you do have any particular scenarios that you would like to discuss with us, we are more than happy to help and advise you on that. The other type of testing that we offer is prenatal paternity testing. So this is carried out in a different way, and it uses a blood sample provided from the pregnant mother, along with buccal swab samples from the mother and father. And what we are able to do is we are able to collect the blood, and we use next generation sequencing to analyse the fetal DNA from the child. So collecting the blood sample from the mother is a safe method of collecting a sample. Traditionally, tests require CVS and amniocentesis, which carry risk of miscarriage, whereas a blood sample is safe for the mother to provide. The mother can provide a sample from the 7th week of pregnancy all the way up until the point of labour, and we can use the sample to identify the fetal DNA to determine the paternity of a baby before it's born. The reason for doing this is to develop our safeguarding plans early. You can assess potential carers, you can reduce care costs, and it's ultimately better for the baby to have fewer moves between the care settings. All of our results are accepted by UK courts, and the test can also be used in private cases for custody arrangements. I'm now going to discuss what is in our DNA expert reports. So any test that you carry out, you will receive a DNA expert report. This report is very detailed and will contain all of the information about the laboratory, our accreditation, the testing process that has been carried out. It will also detail the expert witness that has carried out your test. It will detail their qualifications and experience. It will outline who has requested the analysis, the details surrounding the chain of custody, and it will also provide sample donor information along with the most important part, the results of testing. So this has all been written, this whole document is really informative. It's got all of the key information, but it's written in a way that you're able to understand exactly what we're saying based on the DNA. The results are laid out really clearly. And so you will see something similar to this that's on the screen now. This is an example report. It lays out the name of the tested individuals, their relationships, all of the pertinent information about their sample collection, and it'll have the results section. So in this example, we are determining that John Doe is not the biological parent of Jane Doe because 9 mismatches have been observed between the alleged parent and child. You will also receive a technical data summary. So this will outline the DNA profile of each individual that has been submitted for testing. It will show you exactly what the PI is for each marker. So the PI is the statistical calculation to work out, do they share DNA because they are related in the way that we have described, e.g. as parent and child, or what is the chance that they are unrelated and they share that DNA by random chance. So in this example, if you look at the top marker that's highlighted in red, D16S539, the father has alleles 9 and 10, and the child has 11 and 12. Now, because parents and children share 50% of their DNA, we would expect the child to have either a 9 or a 10. In this case, because the child has 11 or 12, our test would say, well, he's not likely then to be the father of this child because he hasn't passed his DNA on at this marker. We go through our range of markers, whether that is 25, 45, or 153. And in this case, there are too many markers that don't match to allow us to say that he is excluded as being the parent of this child. I'm now just going to go through some real-life case studies that we have dealt with fairly recently. So in the first case, we had an immigration test that had 4 siblings. And so the instructing party, the solicitor, had told us that these 4 siblings were all full siblings. So we carried out the DNA test to prove that, to support their Home Office application. And what we found is that one of the siblings did not appear to be a full sibling of the other 3. We went back to the IP and questioned this, and the instructing party told us that that was the information they had, but the mother was available to provide a sample. So we included the mother, and we found that she was not the mother of this child. So then we assumed that this outlying sibling must then be a paternal half sibling sharing the same father. So we tested that hypothesis, but again, the test did not support that relationship. So the solicitor was quite confused by this as well. Obviously, they've been provided information by their client. So we requested for the father of the children to provide a sample. And what we found was that he was not the father of this child, but he was the paternal uncle. And so we were able to determine the exact scenario in that quite complex case, just by looking and by increasing the number of people that we tested to give us a really clear picture on what that scenario was. The second case that I wanted to highlight was a prison sample collection for a prenatal paternity case. So prison sample collections are fairly common for us, and usually it's the alleged father that is in prison, and one of our sample collectors can attend to collect a sample from him to be used in a paternity case. Now, in this example, what was unique about it was the sample donor was actually the mother of the child, and the reason for carrying out the test was so that they could arrange the placement of the child following its birth because the mother was going to be in prison still. And then the third case that I've included is where we had a deceased individual that had quite a large estate and it was going through probate. And there were a couple of people who came out of the woodwork and said that they were relatives of the deceased to try to lay claim and get some inheritance. The deceased was actually, they'd already been interred, so we were not able to collect any samples from them. But what we did find is that the coroner had collected tissue samples that were still available. So we had the coroner transfer them into our possession. We maintained the chain of custody and we completed all the necessary documentation to satisfy the courts. We transferred that into our laboratory. We carried out the testing and we were able to determine who the children of the deceased were so that their probate case could go through. So I've just picked 3 quite different cases. The scenarios are fairly common. They are used for the similar sorts of reasons, but they are so wide-ranging and varied. So I would urge you, if you do have any kind of case that you're debating whether DNA testing might help, please do get in contact with us and we can advise what the best test would be and the best people to be involved within that testing. I'm now going to hand back over to Andrew.
Thanks very much, Casey. Really interesting stuff. Okay, just a reminder, please, we've actually had a couple of questions come in while Casey's been talking. So if anybody else has any questions of their own, then please do send them through to us on the question and answer facility on the Zoom, and we will answer that question for you. So this slide is really just sort of summarising what Casey's been saying, really. So these are different sort of key scenarios where DNA testing would really be applicable for legal matters. Obviously, things like birth certificate changes to allow the General Register Office to make amendments to a birth certificate. Casey referred in one of her case studies to immigration. So immigration cases to verify biological relationships between family members in support of a visa or a passport application. Inheritance disputes can be useful for that as well, to confirm biological relationships for inheritance or probate disputes. And then, of course, family law cases, so establishing parentage in child custody or financial disputes. And indeed, where child welfare is concerned, proceedings to provide evidence for local authorities or courts in child protection matters. And just on those last 2, really, just wanted to specifically mention the fact that you'll no doubt be aware that last year there were some changes to the family procedure rules. So now there's an increased emphasis on non-court dispute resolution, or NCDR, to promote a more amicable and conciliatory approach and avoid an overburdened court system. So, for example, courts can now adjourn a case without the agreement of all parties and request that they look at all the NCDR opportunities available to them. And indeed, failure of a party to participate without good reason can lead to increased court costs. Another change in the rules is the reduction in the types of circumstances where a mediation exemption can be applied. So basically what I'm saying in summary is there's now an increased need to consider DNA testing at a pre-proceeding stage, or where you've been asked to look at mediation. And indeed, we can support at any stage of the process. We don't need to wait for a court order to do a DNA test for you. It can happen at any stage on a particular case. So just wanted to make you aware of that. So in terms of our collections service, we have a national team of professional collectors who can attend any UK or Ireland address. We've also got, as you can see in the map there, we've got 21 sample collection centres in major cities, 2 of which are in Ireland as well, where we can offer free sample collections. So if it is a home sample collection, then we do have a small charge for that. But if it was more relevant to send your client or sample donor to one of our centres, we would do that collection free of charge. We can also provide free training on sample collections for local authorities as well. If for whatever reason you decided you wanted to do your own collections, then we can excuse me, we can offer training to make sure it's done within chain of custody. And this slide just leads on nicely to chain of custody. Again, just wanted to summarise what the chain of custody requirements are for court admissible results. So the sample is always collected by a professional sample collector. The test participants are required to provide a form of identification, preferably photographic. Photographs are taken of the test participants to provide proof that the correct donors have been tested. The sample is always securely sealed in front of the sample donor using tamper-evident seal to maintain sample integrity. And then we always use an electronic consent form to document the sample donor details and act as a record of the sample collection process. And then finally, the sample is returned to our UCAS accredited laboratory up in Warrington in Cheshire. It comes via fast-track secure courier, and it's tracked through from sample collection all the way through to the analysis at the laboratory by Casey and her team, after which, of course, the report is issued to yourself. In terms of what makes us the #1 DNA laboratory, very briefly, just wanted to make you aware that we always offer competitive pricing and a premium service. All our pricing for DNA testing is within legal aid agency rates. We also have a price promise, so if you do shop around, get quotes from other testing providers, please make us aware of it, because we do promise to beat that quote by a further 10%. All our quotes are provided within 1 hour of the request. And sample collection, as I mentioned, is available from any UK or Ireland address within 24 to 48 hours of instruction. And we can offer the free sample collection option from any of our 21 UK and Ireland walk-in centres. We do pride ourselves on the fact that once the samples are received into the lab, we do turn around the test results for the next working day as standard. If required even quicker, we can do same day turnaround. If all the samples are received into the lab before 10 o'clock, we can provide the report the same day. So again, that's something that we can offer to you if you need those results really quickly. As Casey's mentioned, our reports are designed to be user-friendly, they're court approved, and they are included as standard. There's no extra charge for those expert reports. You have a dedicated case manager to fully manage your instruction from start to finish. And as I mentioned, we are a fully accredited UK laboratory with no outsourcing to labs in Europe. Okay, so move on to the Q&A now. As I say, we had a few questions as part of the registration process, and I can see we've had a couple come through while we've been talking, so thank you to those of you that have done that. So, right, Casey, so first question to yourself. You have obviously spoken about this, but just probably to summarise again. So in terms of wider family network and connected persons who could reliably be tested to inform the likely identity of the birth mother or father, if the potential parent cannot be tested themselves?
Yeah, so in those cases, we would look to test relatives of that alleged parent, whether they are aunts, uncles, grandparents of the child in question, or whether that they potentially have other children, so you can do a sibling test. So we would look at the wider family and we would see who's available. Obviously, it's really case dependent. Sometimes you have a huge family where there are loads of donors to choose from, and sometimes it's really difficult to find relatives. So if you do have a complex case like that and you don't know who to test, please do get in contact and we'll be able to advise you on who would be best to use.
That's great. Thanks, Casey. Second question that's come through is, what could be the potential ethical concerns regarding children undergoing DNA in family cases or family disputes?
Well, there are a lot of ethical considerations that need to be made when carrying out any DNA testing, because the implications could really change somebody's life, and you could determine through DNA testing that people are not related to others in the way that they thought that they were. So it's really important that we get consent from all of the test donors. So any sample donor that is over the age of 16 will need to provide consent for their own sample to be used. And for any child under the age of 16, we require consent from a parent or guardian to provide that appropriate consent. Now, there are cases where we are directed by a court order to proceed with DNA testing. And in those cases, we really do believe that you guys as professionals take your job really seriously, and you make all those ethical considerations to act in the best interest of the child when that testing is requested.
Thanks very much, Casey. Okay, a couple of questions that have come in during the webinar, so I'll ask them to yourself again, Casey. So this is a really interesting one. So do the 25 markers you use routinely include sex determination markers? So in effect, the 25 becomes, say, 23 autosomal markers when those aren't counted.
Yes, that is how they work. Yeah, so we test 25 DNA markers. 2 of them are sex markers. So the reason that we test these sex markers is part of our quality control process. So we expect alleged fathers to be male, we expect mothers to be female, and the children, we do ask for sex at birth so that we can match up the expected sex with the biological sex that we have determined through the test. So yes, in a 25 marker test, there would be 2 sex chromosomes and 23 autosomal chromosomes.
Thanks, Casey. I've got a couple of questions now with regard to false positives. The first one is simply, in what circumstances could results be providing false positives?
So false positives may be provided if we don't fully know or haven't fully been told the full test scenario. So for example, our paternity test would say, are you related as a father and child, or are you unrelated? Now, if you were alternatively related in another way, for example, if there were 2 brothers who were both potentially the father of the child, where one of them will be the father and the other one will be the uncle, then that is a different scenario. And if we haven't taken that into consideration when we've carried out the statistical analysis, there is a risk of getting a false positive result. What we do to try and mitigate this is to ask the sample donors at the point of sample collection whether there could be any other way that they are related to one another. We appreciate that as IPs, sometimes you guys wouldn't know either the full details about the family and the case that is being tested. So we do ask at the point of collection, is there any other way that you guys could be related to one another? And then we would feed that into our statistical analysis to make sure that we don't get false positive results.
Thanks, Casey. And sort of following on from that, you sort of answered it, but just it was a specific question that came in during the webinar. So the question is, false positives seem to be possible in sibling tests. Are they also possible in paternity testing? If so, is there any way to identify a false positive?
Yeah, so typically these will occur when you only test 2 individuals. So for example, in a sibling case, you're much less likely to get a false positive or negative result if you include the mother of the child or children. If they've got different, they might have different mothers. If you include one or both mothers, that would help to reduce the chance. And if you're doing a paternity case, we can do that with just the father and child. You will get a likelihood ratio. So if you have a very low likelihood ratio, you might be thinking, you know, is this potentially a false positive? But a way to increase that likelihood is to include the mother of the test and to provide you more assurance that the result is correct and accurate and it hasn't been affected by any other relationship.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Casey. Okay, one more question that's come in, which I'll answer this one. So please advise on the recent developments in family law to look more closely at results rather than just at the summary conclusion. What should we be looking out for in the report? Yeah, this question came in before, obviously, the webinar. So, Casey did really cover that. So, absolutely, our reports are user-friendly. They're designed not to just give you that summary. The all-important summary, obviously, is really important, the actual result. But every aspect to it is designed to support you in court. So things such as the participant identification, who those individuals are, the markers and alleles that are being used, as Casey talked about, the paternity index, which is the statistical value, the likelihood of paternity for each marker, the combined paternity index, or the CPI, the probability of paternity, and also the quality control measures that we undertake to provide those reports to you. So each report includes information about the lab's accreditation, our adherence to testing standards, and any quality control procedures that are implemented during the analysis. So we think everything's captured in those reports. We're always reviewing our reports and looking to improve it as we can, but we feel that everything that would be required in a court situation is required in a user-friendly manner in our reports. Right, I think that concludes the Q&A. Thanks to everybody that's asked the question. I think we've answered them all. We'll double check afterwards. If we haven't, if we missed one, then we will send an answer to that person. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much, firstly, to Casey for your presentation this morning. And thank you to everybody else for your valued time. Before you log off, could I please just ask if you could take a moment to complete the very short webinar survey that will appear on your screen. It just gives us really good feedback that we can use for planning future AlphaBiolabs webinars. So I would appreciate if you could kindly do that. So that's all that's left for me to say is please do get in touch with us. We are the experts in drug, alcohol and DNA testing. All our key methods of contact are on the screen there for you now. So our phone numbers in both the UK and Ireland, also our website addresses. The best email address to contact us on, whether you want more information or a specific quote, is testing@alphabiolabs.com. Also, if you're on social media, in particular LinkedIn, then please do give us a follow on there and we can follow you back. So once again, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been really enjoyable to spend time with you. Enjoy your day, and we look forward to seeing you soon on the next round of AlphaBiolabs webinars. Thanks very much and goodbye.